Hello, I am Carol MacGibbon, West Point class of 1980. This year, the Association of Graduates decided to recognize 40 years of female alumni from West Point. The president of the West Point Society of North Texas, Bob Rogers, and the board decided to try something different at Founders Day this year to get more of a human interest story, if you will. I'm not on staff at West Point. I never wore stars on my shoulders, nor am I the CEO of a company. So I'm not the traditional speaker, but I was in a small group that experienced something very unique in the history of our school, being in the first class of women. So I was asked to speak. 40 years, imagine that. This is when suitcases didn't have wheels. Phones were tethered to the wall. Cadets wrote papers by hand. When men were men and giants strode the plain. I learned a lot while working on this. There is a story to tell, and it's a window into the collective history of our school. First, I'd like to briefly talk about that 40-year span of female grads, and then I want to come back and talk a bit about what it was like at the beginning. The AOG put together a short video that summarizes those 40 years, and I'd like to start with that. You just saw a lot of faces. Now, putting names to some of those faces, I'd like to mention just a few of the many noteworthy female alumni. Starting at the top left, Brigadier General Cindy Jebb, class of '82, the current dean. Simone Nescu, class of '18, the first female African-American brigade commander. Nadia West, class of '82, retired lieutenant general, the 44th U.S. Army Surgeon General and former commanding general of the United States Army Medical Command. Kelsey Minato, the all-time leading scorer in Army basketball annals for men and women, called the greatest basketball player to come out of a service academy since David Robinson, according to Wayne Coffey of USA Today. Erin Malden, class of '14, class valedictorian, a Truman Scholar and the first American woman to graduate from French Commando School. Kristen Grease and Shay Haver, the first women to graduate from Ranger School. Diana Holland, class of '90, the first female commandant. Also, Kristen Baker, class of '90, the first female first captain. My classmate Andrea Holland, the first female to receive a diploma from West Point and a Rhodes Scholar. And the Duke sisters, the only family of 4 sisters to graduate, sometimes known as the Pointer Sisters. A few more examples. Major General Heidi Brown, class of '81, the first woman to command a brigade in combat. Major General Robin Fontes, class of '86, who speaks Russian, Dari, and Farsi, spent years in the Middle East, was the first female U.S. Defense Attaché to India, currently in U.S. Cyber Command. Brigadier General Michelle Schmidt, 92, currently in the 10th Mountain Division, formerly Special Operations Command J2, and JSOC Intelligence Brigade Commander, who spent 6 years in Delta Force. And I have to mention Dallas's own Ellen Houlihan, class of '82, past vice chair of the board of directors, West Point AOG, now a director on the board of the Army West Point Athletic Association. Ellen was also the first female cadet elected president of her class. Amazing women. I will talk later about what has changed over time, but first let's go back to where this all started. I'd like to address the 2 questions we get asked the most. Why did you go, and what was it like? First, why I went to West Point. My grandfather was an artillery officer in World War I, and my grandmother served in the Women's Overseas League. My father and uncle served in World War II. It was never said out loud, but what I took away from that was everyone should take their turn serving their country. I was strong in math and science. I wanted an education. I had to go for the gusto factor. I wanted to do something that not just anyone could do. I wanted to travel. I needed a scholarship. I was applying for an ROTC scholarship like my brother before me. Well, in my senior year, 1975, I went to a West Point Glee Club concert in Pittsford, New York, and met 2 cadets afterward, speaking with them for a couple of hours. That night changed my life. That night is when I found out the law had just passed opening West Point to women, and I also found out the men were very much opposed to it. While these 2 cadets were very nice to me, there was a lot of anger that night, and when I visited the school as a candidate. However, after much thought and speaking to local alumni, I decided I would regret it forever if I didn't try. In short, I went for the same reasons most men went. I did not go to prove anything. I did not go to make a political statement. It was a big risk because I didn't know if I would succeed. No one could know how this was going to go. No one knew how we would be treated inside those walls. I can't imagine what my parents were thinking when they drove home on our day. The last thing I wanted to do was embarrass myself or my family. My class is married to a class of '79 grad, the last all-male class, which they are immensely proud of. They call themselves the Omega class and have an interesting unofficial class motto. Last year, they had their 40th reunion. One of the '79 spouses on my friend's table said, "I think those women in the class of '80 came here just to get a husband." If people knew what we went through, they would know that statement is absurd. But for some reason, she still thinks that way, and for some reason it was a topic on that table 43 years later. Now, what it was like. This forced change at West Point was at times difficult, frustrating, fascinating, and funny in only the way West Point can be funny. It really was something to witness. So I'd like to share some facts and some stories in some semblance of chronological order. First, Beast and Plebe Year. To set the stage, at the time, I didn't know the superintendent, Sidney Berry, had threatened to resign over this. Probably better not to know. After Plebe Year, our second soup, Andrew Goodpasture, told the staff and faculty that if they had a problem with women being there, they should get up and leave right then and there. He had dropped his star to go back on active duty to see West Point through this change and the ongoing honor scandal. Admitting women was a simple and very complicated change at the same time. The physical changes were negligible. They walled off some latrines for women and had to come up with some locker room space. That was it. That is, until they figured out that men were looking in our rooms with binoculars, and they had to put shades in the women's room. The social and psychological changes were monumental. The majority of cadets, staff, and faculty were opposed to this new law that allowed women. Most cadets grumbled, maybe argued about it at times. A few supported us from day one. A small number were vehemently opposed to us and were determined that we would not graduate. You can't tell people to change their minds. I knew that if this change was going to be successful, it would take years. My father gave me these words of encouragement as we drove through Thayer Gate on our day. I don't want you to come crying home this summer. 119 women started on 7 July. If you're senior to me, you may not know that we lived in the same hallways in the barracks with the men. We did the same PT and formation right next to them. We ran to calisthenics, grass drills, rifle PT, force marches with our squad. We took self-defense instead of boxing and wrestling. Swimming was the same. In the indoor obstacle course, the only difference in execution for the women was our legs could touch the pommel horse. And we did different apparatus in gymnastics class. One difference, however, was that the grading scales were different for the APFT, IOCT, and the 2-mile run. The only difference in the military training was they had to cut the springs in the rifles for inspection arms. We just didn't have the hand or arm strength for that. Of course, the academics were exactly the same. Now imagine you're an 18-year-old female, you just met your roommate, and you're both standing at parade rest in your room on the first day. Your 21-year-old deadly serious squad leader teaches you the military way to fold a bra. The men's pants had metal zippers, but for some reason they put plastic zippers in the women's pants. On our day, I marched in our pass and review with my pants pinched up because the zipper broke. One day in the first week, the media were allowed in. We were doing grass drills on Buffalo Soldiers Field that day, and a reporter held a microphone 1 foot from my face while I ran in place. They had no concept of limits, and they swarmed like locusts. Did not go well. If they asked to speak to cadets, they only wanted to speak to women. West Point quickly, severely limited their access, and if they spoke to a cadet, it had to be the whole squad. We're always inspecting new cadets' uniforms. So you go down the squad one at a time, starting with the hat, haircut, gig line, belt buckle, and shoes. For those who don't know, the gig line is a straight line down your shirt, the edge of your belt buckle, and the fly of your pants. When the squad leader got to a female and the gig line, he'd look, frown, he'd look at his own gig line, he'd turn around and compare himself to you, and then he'd say, "Hey Joe, come on over here, look, the women are all backwards." A crowd gathered around to see this phenomenon. That's when I learned the women's shirts button right over left and the men's button left over right. Who knew? If you couldn't keep a straight face while this was going on, you had to wipe the smirk off your face, throw it on the ground, call it to attention, and march it off. The beast, I was told I would be escorted to the phone booth in the basement for a phone interview with a hometown reporter. An exception was made for me to take a phone call, and I didn't like that. The woman asked, "How do you like it there?" I told her, "We're not supposed to like it. It's West Point. It's extremely difficult. Plus, it's Beast Barracks. And you're making it harder on me because I'm not supposed to be able to talk to you." The cadre member who escorted me down there told me he liked those answers. We didn't want to be singled out for being female. We bent over backwards to blend in. We were issued short bathrobes in Beast. We had to wear the shower uniform for blister inspections with a bathrobe, shower shoes, a towel, and a soap dish. They learned rather quickly that the women needed a couple of snaps on those bathrobes. The people were accidentally getting flashed during blister inspections. Training at Lake Frederick, we did a confidence course that involved running up and down steep, muddy slopes, 5 or 6 pugil stick stations, pyrotechnics, and gas. We were a filthy mess after that. As I finished, a major from public affairs made me sit in a field of flowers so a reporter could take a picture. I asked him if I had to, although I knew I had no choice. The men felt slighted when these things happened. One day, I would love to reconnect with our cadre and hear their stories. The first time we could have visitors, one of the women in the class climbed into her parents' car and burst into tears. Once she had that out of her system, she said, "Those bastards are never going to get rid of me." That attitude is the one thing the women shared, along with ridiculously bad haircuts. The barbers have been cutting men's military haircuts for decades, and they butchered our hair. At Lake Frederick, we marched back to post and the academic year, and to thousands of upperclassmen who still hadn't seen a female cadet. We were starting all over. Now we were outnumbered by about 37 to 1. We were in a huge fishbowl. If a male cadet and female were in the same room, the door had to be open. It wasn't unusual for upperclassmen to take male plebes into their room, shut the door, and tell them they didn't have a beast, the standards were lower, and so on, which further divided our class. There were no locks on the doors. We had 5 seconds when someone knocked before they could open it in case we were changing. But we never felt unsafe in the barracks, and that says a lot. Women were very isolated. The first year we were put in the first company in each battalion, or 1 out of 3 companies. Companies without women were very proud of that fact, and that was a problem. The second year, the class of 80 women were split up, and the class of 81 women came in. So by the second year, all companies had women. In G3, we started with 9. After 2 years, there were just 2 of us left. I only had 2 roommates in 4 years, one of them for 6 semesters. There seemed to be endless, dreaded human relations training the first year at every level: squad, platoon, company, and higher. It always ended in arguments. Women who were outspoken were not popular. At large assemblies, cadets made fun of women who stood and asked questions. I do want to say that I never saw any resentment or unprofessional behavior from the staff and faculty. The women were constantly studied by the PE department, the tactical department, doctors, and by sociologists in something called Project Athena. There was no privacy, and it was easy to feel like a lab rat. One football weekend plebe year, my brother was meeting me at the Thayer Hotel on Saturday. I walked down there, up the steps into the lobby, where every head in that very full room zeroed in on me. It took me a while to realize this was homecoming, and these were alumni who had never seen a female cadet. Here we go again. Swimming intramurals plebe year, we always competed with men in everything, and I desperately didn't want to let them down. I validated plebe swimming, but I never swam competitively. I recall one race, a sprint, where I gave it everything I had. I never swam like that in my life. I came in third, beating 5 guys. The best thing was as I touched that wall, I realized guys were cheering for me, even upperclassmen. Couldn't believe it. I can't tell you how much that meant to me. Small victories was very much frowned upon for a guy to date a female cadet. Men were asked, "What's the matter? Can't you find a real girl?" There were jokes about us and derogatory names. Sometimes a guy might want to date you, but he didn't really want to be seen with you. Brought out the worst in people. At times I was disgusted by what we saw and how we were treated by the cream of the crop, as you would be if the stories were told. There was some nasty behavior and even some criminal behavior. I had to remind myself then and now that half the Corps is teenagers, and the drinking age then was 18. Sometimes men behave badly, sometimes women behave badly. However, I tried very hard to see things from the men's perspective. I understood the anger. I was in awe of this place, and I didn't want to change it. I wanted to be part of it and take my turn serving however the Army might let me serve. Women were issued full dress coats without tails because they thought tails would make our behinds look too big, but it just didn't look right. So now moving on to yearling year and upper class years. They made prototype full dress coats with tails for me and one other woman. We reported to the soup and did an about face a couple of times in front of his desk, and full dress coats with tails were approved. Blazer uniform yearling year, the more casual uniform, it was a blouse, jacket, and skirt. Well, walking to Ike in January in a skirt's pretty darn cold, so we wanted pants. I was asked to design pants for that uniform by the Brigade S4. This lieutenant colonel was the nicest man you'd ever want to meet, with a perpetual smile on his face. He walked up to my table in the mess hall at lunch one day with these pants over his arm, big smile on his face, and said, "Carol, I have your pants." Cadets glanced at each other and then burst out laughing. You never saw a man turn so red. Then one day we were issued knee-high, high-heeled black leather boots to wear with skirts. You can imagine how that went over. Became a rabble rouser. At halftime at one game, the 3 Heisman Trophy winners were honored. After halftime, when the team came back out, the men were sort of forced around them and landed right in front of the rabble rousers. Well, the photographers sort of pushed me and another female together with them for a spontaneous photo. Pete Dawkins walked toward me with a big smile on his face, shaking his head, and said, "I never thought I'd see the day." Doc Blanchard looked none too happy and did not smile for this unplanned Kodak moment. And behind us, the Corps was booing because they were taking yet another photo with females. First summer, I was back at school and dressed up in a yellow dress and heels to go out one Saturday night. I was at one end of a very long hallway all by myself when someone way down at the other end said, "Carol, is that you? You look like a real girl." I think it was the nicest thing anyone ever said to me there. Never found out who said it, but another small victory. That the vast majority of every day, week, and month, we were treated like any other cadet. Everyone was busy trying to survive and squeeze in a little time for fun. Most cadets never bothered us, and many befriended us over time as they saw how hard we worked. The last couple of years, things really quieted down. I had visited Navy and Air Force as a cadet, and I felt that Army handled the transition better than the other academies. But some ugliness reared its head graduation week. One of the women returned to her room to find a saber through her pillow with ketchup poured on it. All the women received anonymously through the message center a photocopied article written by an admiral stating why women shouldn't be at the academies. Men were concerned how graduation would be handled. Of our graduation was a small ceremony for the women in the Soups Garden, where some members of the class of 1939 presented us with a small silver tray with a printed note. The only photo of the women was taken that week by Life magazine. 62 women graduated that year. I do want to say that in hindsight, I really don't think West Point could have done a better job integrating women. It just takes time. After graduation, for many years, I was leery of the reaction I would get from grads older than me, but slowly things changed until now the reaction is exactly opposite what it used to be, or I wouldn't be speaking to you. As Pete Dawkins said, "I never thought I'd see the day." It was with no small amount of satisfaction that in later years we saw members of the classes of 77, 78, and 79 send their daughters to West Point. Speaking of cadet daughters, only at this school would a parent have a bumper sticker that says, "My daughter is a cow." My daughter's class of 07, she sent me one of those bumper stickers, and yes, it went on my car. 5 years ago, at the local West Point annual breakfast, local West Point Society annual breakfast, a grad recognized me and asked if I remembered him. 4 decades after I met him and 37 years since I had last seen him, I was reconnected with one of the cadets I met after that Glee Club concert in 1975 when this all started for me, my friend Mike Johnson, class of 78. Where we are today, women's athletics have come a long way. Of 30 intercollegiate teams, 10 are women's teams. Women now take boxing and box at the club level. Cadet Madeline Kenyon broke the female indoor obstacle course record in 2017 with an incredible 2:26, one of those cadets who blows the curve for everyone else. The Army is converting to a gender and age neutral PT test. It will become the Army Physical Test of Record not later than October this year. I am told it's more realistic and a better assessment of fitness. Of course, you know that all Army branches, MOSs, and schools are now open to women. Significant change in my mind has been attitude. As long as they can pull their weight, male, female is irrelevant. Cadets see one another's capabilities and personality first. It's just not an issue. One of the kids I helped get into West Point from Plano East Senior High School had to drop out of Ranger School twice to fight cancer. He made it the third time. He sat at a news conference and said, "I wouldn't have gotten through it if it wasn't for her," pointing to the woman next to him, one of the first 2 female Rangers. That opened my eyes and spoke a lot to her character as well as his. Another success story. My daughter, Jen Berry, class of '07, one of my heroes, served in an infantry battalion in Afghanistan. She went on missions with them and commanded the female engagement team. I am told there's a female company commander in Ranger Regiment, and a female is about to finish the Special Forces Q course. These are just a few examples of how things have changed. In preparing for this, I had a fascinating conversation with Brigadier General Michelle Schmidt, class of '92, who, as I said earlier, spent 6 years in Delta Force. I was trying to find out about women who go in with the door kickers. She spoke reverently about Lieutenant Ashley White with a cultural support team with the Rangers in Afghanistan. She was so impressive that a book was written about her, Ashley's War, the untold story of a team of women soldiers on the Special Ops battlefield, by Gail Lemon. General Schmidt was emotional when she told me the Rangers had so much respect for Ashley that they lined up in droves at the aircraft. When she was sent home after being killed by an IED, General Schmidt spoke about an unnamed lieutenant colonel, a brilliant woman in intelligence with Special Operations Joint Task Force in Afghanistan, who she called, quote, a force multiplier, who had her hands in everything. When she speaks, everyone listens, unquote. She told me a female interrogator was the force behind the killing of Abu al-Zakari in 2006, who, when attending a meeting in a safe house, had a run-in with 2 500-pound bombs. General Schmidt said, "We don't need diversity for diversity's sake, but we must have diversity in our thinking." I learned in preparing for this that not only is there less resistance to women, some generals are asking for them. General Stanley McChrystal saw females as a unique, untapped asset, the only asset that would have access to women in these societies, and those women know what the men are up to. Admiral William McCraven requested women soldiers be trained for and deployed with special operations, specifically the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. In conclusion, women have always contributed in time of war. The difference has been in what capacity. Warfare has changed, the battlefield has changed, weapon systems have changed, and the enemy has changed. The Army is in constant flux, determining how to best utilize women. The Army exists to deter our enemies, to train to fight our wars, and to execute that mission when necessary. Women are contributing to that mission now more than ever. Lastly, I am immensely thankful to feel like a welcome member of the Long Gray Line. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and beat Navy.